that fascinates me, and this is how open-minded I am, is I give it a 50-50 shot. I don't know. I'm open-minded enough. I used to be real skeptical about stuff, but truth is, anything's possible, and I don't even know if there's any way for us to know or prove it one way or another. Welcome to the Women Rockin' Midlife Podcast, soulful wellness to elevate your second act. You deserve to deeply love every moment of your life, living your best life with pure joy, optimal health and abundance, with the energy, time, and inner peace to savor experiences with your loved ones and with yourself. Hi, I'm Jen Kunkel. Join me on this soulful journey to complete wellness in midlife and beyond. We're talking about how to stop menopause anxiety, specifically top tips to stop triggers. So anxiety is a symptom of menopause. It's super common and often overlooked, weirdly. Anxiety can be a side effect of the other symptoms, like hot flashes and lack of sleep, but also those other symptoms can be brought on by anxiety. So you end up in this big vicious cycle, which is no fun. But here's the good news. Menopause anxiety is not inevitable and it is solvable. You do not have to live with it, even if you're navigating menopause naturally, and that's important to you. There are ways to do this without drugs, without HRT, even without supplements. Years ago, when I was in perimenopause, I had 2 anxiety attacks within just a few days. You may have heard me tell this story. Anxiety had never been an issue for me before, and after I took steps to stop it, it actually never happened again. So I tell the whole story in another episode, so I won't do it here. Let's jump right into talking about identifying triggers for menopausal anxiety, because it's not just, oh, I have menopause, so I'm going to have anxiety. It can make you more susceptible to it, but you might be able to notice certain triggers, and then that way you can avoid those triggers, or you can modify what's going on in your outer world so that you don't get the anxiety so much. That's coming at it from that angle, to look at what the triggers are and see if they can be avoided or downplayed or handled differently. Food or drink is one of the first things that I want to talk about. So there's a lot of processed foods out in our world today, convenience foods, fast foods, restaurants, and some of the ingredients in those processed foods can actually affect your endocrine system, your hormones, and that might trigger anxiety or other menopause symptoms. For example, not anxiety, but hot flashes. Red wine is a trigger for me. So even though I use my maintenance practices and I don't really get hot flashes, I will get a little warm flash if I drink some red wine sometimes. If I remember to do a little meditation practice before I have it, then maybe I won't get that. And I also have ways to stop it once it starts happening, or to kind of calm it down. Sometimes I'm reminded abruptly because I didn't think about it, or I haven't been doing my maintenance practices or something, and I have a couple glasses of red wine. I'm like, oh, I'm getting a little warm flash. And I say warm flash because of the maintenance that I do, it doesn't really come out as a full-blown hot flash. All right, another trigger could be activity, usually more, though, lack of activity. So if you're finding yourself more lethargic and not doing as much, you might find yourself feeling more anxiety, get a little antsy. So low energy is associated with less activity, and then you end up again, this is another one of those vicious cycles that you get into. You have low energy, so you aren't very active, and then you feel even more low energy. So if you can push yourself to get moving, that you're going to feel better. Activity and moving your body is so good for your just general wellness, right? It's good for your hormonal balance, and it's good for your emotional well-being. So it's going to help you in every aspect. Another trigger that seems super obvious, but maybe isn't, is a stressful situation. especially conflict with other people, because sometimes those are really hard to avoid. Obviously, a stressful situation can create anxiety. Now, when you have a conflict with another person and that person is someone that's very hard to avoid, like maybe someone that you work with or a family member that you might butt heads with, you might have to get a little creative in avoiding that trigger. Sometimes just being aware of it will give you the foresight to not be so reactive if something happens. So when you start to see a pattern, you can see it coming sooner, and maybe you can use a breathing technique. There's a lot of different ways that you can deal with that. You could even just have it in mind and decide, okay, I know this is a potential trigger and I'm not going to let it get to me. Just being prepared. Sometimes what makes a situation stressful is that we're caught off guard. Maybe you're caught off guard by someone's reaction, but as you start to look at it more closely, you realize, well, this person, they overreact about things, or they get upset about things that most people wouldn't, or you can start to see patterns in their behavior and predict them, and then it doesn't throw you off and you don't get stressed out by it. So there's a lot of reasons why identifying these triggers in your life can help you. So recognizing that these are common triggers is a key first step to starting to notice your own more specific triggers to menopause anxiety. So how do you notice your own? Here's a tip. Don't just keep it in your head, okay? Keep a log. You think you're going to remember and that you'll be able to keep track in your head, but our memories are so fallible. We have a lot going on, especially if you're also experiencing brain fog. So write it down. Write it down. I know, I've done it before too. I'm like, oh, I'll remember it. And then I don't. I write down my food in a food log sometimes, and I always think, oh, I'll write it down later. And the next thing I know, 2 days have gone by, and I'm like, what did I have for breakfast Tuesday? Wait, I didn't write it down for Monday either? Oh, man. And I'm asking somebody else, what do we have for dinner Monday? Do you remember? Did I eat lunch? Wait, what snacks did I have? Yeah. So write it down. Police getting witness statements right after a crime get varying accounts. One witness says, yeah, the suspect was 5'3", blonde, and stocky. And the next witness says, yeah, the suspect was 6'2", brown hair, and really thin. And you're like, you guys are supposed to be describing the same person, but these sound like two completely different people. Were there two people? No, there was just one. Memories are fallible. And if you know about the Mandela effect, that is supposedly explained by fallible memories. Do you know what that is? Oh my gosh. So the Mandela effect is where mass amounts of people have two completely different memories of well-known things. The reason it's called the Mandela effect is because when Mandela died in 2000 something, a lot of people thought he had already died in prison in like the 80s or something. And I was one of them. I remember hearing about Nelson Mandela dying on the news, and I was like, what? I thought he died a long time ago. Wasn't he some kind of like activist in another country, and he was in prison and he died in prison in the 80s? I thought that. And then I find out later that a lot of people thought that. And I was like, what? That's wild. And then I hear they're calling it this thing. They're calling it the Mandela effect. And let me know if you're familiar with that or not. And if you're not, I'm going to say enough about it that's going to make you want to go look it up. Because it's really interesting. It's kind of fascinating. Is it fallible memory, or are we shifting timelines, parallel universes? I know that's not what this is about, but this is your little Easter egg here in this video, because this is something that fascinates me. And this is how open-minded I am, is I give it a 50-50 shot. I don't know. I'm open-minded enough. I used to be real skeptical about stuff, but truth is anything's possible. And I don't even know if there's any way for us to know or prove it one way or another. But there's things like Curious George having a tail. I swear I remember Curious George having a tail, but if you look up Curious George now, even the old books, no tail. What? What was he hanging from? I swear I remember him having a tail. Bernstein bears versus Berenstein bears. There's a bunch of them. I actually have my own Mandela effect incident too. When I was a teenager, I would go visit my dad, and he lived in Oklahoma. He moved to Oklahoma at some point. And I remember one summer, it seemed like the radio stations only had country music on at the time. And back then, I wasn't into that. The room I stayed in had an old stereo of his with an 8-track player in it, and there was like 1 or 2 8-tracks. And I would listen to this orange, I mean, I have very specific, vivid memories of this situation. And this 8-track player being in this room, it was an orange 8-track, and there's only 8 songs, so I remember most of them, like Maggie May by Rod Stewart, a Jackson Browne song, the Steve Miller Band. So I can remember specific songs on this 8-track. I remember listening to it in there. There was nowhere else that I would have been listening to it. And I remember I could picture it. I can see it right now in my head. I can see this stereo 8-track player. So I mentioned this to my dad when I'm older, and he gets really adamant, and we kind of get into a little argument about it. He's so adamant about it that there was never an 8-track player in that room. And I'm like, you guys lived there for, I don't know, 15, 18 years, something like that. They lived there for quite some time, over a decade, easily, at least 15 years. And I just said, what is more likely that I mean, you're basically calling me crazy right now by saying that I fabricated this memory, and you're so adamant that it was never in there. Like, what's more likely, that I fabricated this memory, or that you just forgot that you had an 8-track player or a stereo component with an 8-track player in there for a brief period of time of the 18 years you lived in that house? Anyway, he dug his heels in real deep. So later I found out about the Mandela effect, and I was like, well, maybe that happened in a different universe, and he didn't have an 8-track player in that room. I don't know. Fun to think about. That's your little Easter egg for this episode. Let's get back on track. Are you going to look up the Mandela effect? There is a method to my madness, really. It's kind of about being open-minded, but also it's kind of fun. Just add a little funness. And that's something I'm kind of into. I'm sort of a philosopher, and, meaning of life, existentialism. Bottom line, when you keep your log, write it down. Don't just do it in your head. The next thing you need to do is review your log. So keeping a log without actually looking at it really doesn't do you any good, does it? It's only helpful if you look at it. How often do you take notes, like write down goals, or even make a to-do list and never look back at it? I have notebooks full of notes, journals, goals, and I very rarely go back and look at them. So make sure you go back and you look through your log and you look for patterns, and you do it for long enough that you can see some patterns developing. Maybe you have a conflict with the same person over and over and over again, and that's triggering anxiety. Maybe you can avoid that person. Or maybe you can have a conversation with that person. Or maybe you can just go within yourself and find something, maybe it's related to an emotional trauma, which is, one of the possible triggers. So maybe it's not just about the stress and conflict with that person, but it's also related to some deep-seated emotion that got trapped in your body due to, and I say trauma, it could be something major, or it could just be something where your process of feeling got interrupted. And so like a micro trauma, you could look at it like. So make sure that you review your log. And actually, as you start keeping your log, maybe schedule a time like a week later to review it. And the reason that we went down this Mandela effect path is to be open-minded. How open-minded are you? Cognitive dissonance is a real thing. So when you're reviewing your log, it's going to be easy for you to overlook possible triggers that you don't want to be triggers. Maybe you get anxiety every time you eat chocolate, and you don't want to accept that. You don't even want to acknowledge that because you love chocolate, because chocolate's yummy. Do your best to be objective. How open-minded are you? Are you 50-50 with me that the Mandela effect is real and we actually do shift universes, some of us? Or is it fallible memory? Be open-minded when you're looking at your log. Be careful not to discount a possible trigger source just because you don't want it to be a trigger source. Or maybe someone you really love hanging out with, you realize actually causes you anxiety for some reason. There are ways to work with that, okay? Even if they're causing you anxiety, there are ways to adapt the situation so that it doesn't. So don't worry. It's not the end of the world. Just be honest with yourself about your triggers. And if you have someone that can look it over for you, with you, and give you some objective feedback, especially if it's someone you trust, that would be great. If you're able to identify your triggering patterns, then the next step is to stop them. So if you'd like to learn how I could help you do that, apply for a free menopause balance breakthrough session with me. We'll hop on a Zoom call and we'll talk about it. No pressure, no strings. The link's in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today. Hit me up on socials, also in the show notes, and let's rock this midlife thing together.